Welcome now to Culture at Work on the Business Radio Network, presented by Crest Insurance, with host Matt Nelson.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's episode of Culture at Work in Tucson, proudly presented by Crest Insurance Group, where we learn from and celebrate the local leaders, businesses, and nonprofit organizations who have stood the test of Tucson time. I'm your host, Matt Nelson of Crest Insurance, and I'm joined here at Tucson Business RadioX studios today for our second in-person podcast recording, which is fantastic, kind of as we're working our way through this COVID situation. But I'm joined today with Soleste Lupu and Joey Rodgers, the co-founders of the Dancing in the Streets, Arizona dance studio. And really, it's so much more than a dance studio. I mean, dance studio, nonprofit organization, community organization, so many things to talk about around that. So I'm really excited for this. And this month, we are going to be talking about the idea of inclusion and how that relates to workplace culture. So thank you so much, Soleste and Joey, for joining us. It's truly a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is quite an opportunity. We're excited.
Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'd say yes. Absolutely.
Well, I think, as I was thinking about, and we talked a little bit before we started rolling, but as I think about just everything that's going on right now, right? And I've talked about Tucson as a community. I didn't grow up here. I moved down here about 10 years ago. I went to school to a small state university about 93 miles north of here, and moved down to Tucson and from Phoenix, and really have just been amazed over the past 10 years or so that I've been here. Actually, more than that. Gosh, almost 15 that I've been here.
Almost a native.
Yeah, almost. I'm getting there, slowly but surely. But I have been just awestruck with just how unique the community is here. And having lived in a lot of different places, as I know, you both have traveled to a lot of different places, spent a lot of times in different communities. Tucson has something really unique. There's something here, and it's difficult to put it into words exactly, but people just kind of, I don't know, there's a connection here that you don't see in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think of Tucson as one of those cities, if you were born and raised, or for me, if you were born and raised in Tucson as a kid, it was kind of hard to, to navigate the ways and the means. But when I got older, well, I guess this is where I really appreciate Tucson, when I left and experienced cities like Detroit, Milwaukee, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, New York City, and after you experience those cities, you think back, you go, well, Tucson's not all that bad.
It feels good when the wheels touch the runway.
You get back and you're like, oh, wow, this is not all that bad.
I think one of the things that makes Tucson so special is native of Tucson from the 60s as well. We have such an inclusive city, and it's in everything. It's in the food, it's in the buildings, it's in the land, it's in the desert, it's in the animals. The Native American population, the Asian population, all of the peoples that built the city together have such an influence. And at least the Tucson that I grew up, it wasn't divided. Right. I've gone to other cities where there's this culture on this side and that culture on that side, and we have a festival for this population and a festival for that population. Tucson was always inclusive in the time that I grew up in the 60s. And I've been to other places as well, and I never really noticed how different Tucson was, like Joey said, until like Washington, D.C., Seattle, South Korea. Right. Living in other places really made me realize how special Tucson is. And even as you say, from Phoenix, we're a whole different world from Phoenix.
Yeah.
What's amazing too, how durable. Because I know I didn't appreciate. One of the things that I learned as I spent more time down here is just the amount of history that is domiciled in Tucson. And there's, you talk to people out in the Autumn Nation, and they talk about, that's where the word Tucson comes from, right?
Right.
And then, you talk to people down by the Presidio downtown, where a lot of people don't realize that actually there are people who lived in Tucson that the American border crossed over them.
Right.
Right. So, they lived here. Their family was here, and they became American citizens by virtue of the border moving across them. And so there are so many unique things that kind of convene in this really kind of, if you didn't know it,
yep.
you wouldn't necessarily know to seek it out kind of spot in the Southwest. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that having grown up in that blend, plus I think we're a really artistic, unique culture, and a lot of people moved to Tucson, as you say, in the early history for rebellious reasons. They were, kind of wanting to be on their own. My own neighborhood was founded by a gentleman named Harold Bell Wright, who was an author in 1920, and he was a very controversial author, and so he moved out here in the 20s and wrote this whole series of books, but it was in Tucson in the desert where he was able to feel free to be able to do that.
Right.
To work on his craft. Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit. I know you both grew up in Tucson. I know you both met in ballet school, but tell me a little bit about the path that you walked, from here and then out, into your professional careers and everything like that. And then what drew you back? How did that go?
Do you want to start?
No, you go ahead, start, honey. Go ahead.
Well, we met in ballet school together, and Joey's from South Park area, and I went to Saguaro High School, which is the east side, so we probably wouldn't have met unless we had gone to ballet school together. I was a total bunhead. Ballet was my life. Joey was like, oh, I'm good at this.
Right. That's it. There's girls here.
We started dating when I was about 15, and he was 17. And actually, the big people always ask, well, we're interracial. Wasn't it a huge big deal? And no, it really wasn't. The thing was that I'm Jewish and Joey was Catholic, so that was the big conflict.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we went away and had our separate careers probably in college in the 80s. I got very anorexic and was still continuing to try and pursue a career, and we went our separate ways, and we stayed in contact with each other over the 10 years.
Right.
Kids don't believe this because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have phones, we didn't have anything.
Right.
It was postcards and long-distance calls.
Right.
And then both had separate lives, married other people, went through divorces, life happened, and our parents, like everyone's parents, my father had lung cancer and Joey's father was on dialysis, so we'd been in contact with each other, and I think I went through my divorce about a year and a half before him, and he moved to Seattle with me, and then we kind of gravitated back to Arizona.
Yeah.
In 97, right?
Like most people do, you leave Tucson, and next thing you know, you find your way. And even though while you're gone, you say, I'll never go back to Tucson. I'll never go back to Tucson. Next thing you know, here we are.
Here you are.
I mean, for me, Tucson has always been in my heart. Every city I go to, there are wonderful things that I love about it, but it's never Tucson to me. And I just think the biggest thing to me is there's this whole blend of people and culture and life that doesn't separate itself out.
Well, see, it's different for me because, for me, back in those days, I got in a lot of trouble.
Right.
A lot of trouble. And back in those days, my whole objective was try to get far away from Arizona as possible. And actually, my ballet allowed me to do that. So I went and auditioned for Hartford Ballet in L.A., and he gave me a contract right on the spot. So he's like, you ever been to Connecticut? And I was like, no, but I need to get far away from Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson. Where is that at? On the other side of New York. Fine, that's far enough. Let me go. And actually, that was probably one of the best moves because I took a bus from Tucson all the way to Hartford, Connecticut, and I'll never do that again. But anyway.
It's a long bus ride.
Ooh, boy, 4 days. Ooh, boy. But once I got to Connecticut, it was a total cultural change for me. Coming from the desert, going through the Midwest, bam, here I am in the New England. And it was an eye opener, but it was very challenging. It was something that was needed in my life at that time, because if not, I would have been a statistic. Definitely.
Because you didn't listen to me back in the day when you were dating, I told you your friends were not a good influence.
Well, so, and it's kind of funny because this wasn't something that I had kind of slated as a question to talk about, but it kind of relates because, so Celeste, when we look at you, you were ballet from the start, right? And so you had that routine and everything like that, right?
Well, it goes to my family. I was in orchestra, I was in theater, I was in opera. Performing arts and arts was part of my family. My sister played violin, my sister played viola, my dad played violin, my brother played cello. And because my mother was the founder for Pima Council on Aging, we would go and play string quartets at nursing homes all over the city. And that we would go to museums. It was just part of my family life. And ballet was just, my mom says I was dancing in her stomach. So for me, it was just like this huge love. It was like air. I couldn't live without it. But I was also very challenged because I was not a natural skinny ballerina body. That was the day you had to be. So anorexia really played havoc with how successful my career became. It really plagued me for many, many, many years.
That would make sense. And so if we contrast that with Joey, your experience where, ballet was something you found out that you were good at. And then, like you said, you got in trouble and ballet was kind of the structure, the ladder that you used to climb out,
net.
right?
Absolutely.
So what, if you had to think about what those two stories have in common around like the skills that you learn in ballet, the discipline that you learn in ballet, what should people know about ballet that they don't? Because I would suspect that, that most people have an idea about what ballet is. They have an idea about what goes into the workload, but I would suspect that their idea is probably lacking some context.
The ballet world is the most cutthroat world ever.
It's the hardest career, and we're athletes.
You strive for perfection.
That you will never achieve.
Correct. But the director demands perfection out of the dancer. Out of the dancer. So, boy, ooh.
There's so many. So you learn self-discipline. That applies itself. You also learn to be patient because it's so hard to master the classical ballet technique. There's a lot of people teaching ballet, but it's not pure classical. So there's a very strict anatomy and physiology that has to go along with the teaching that we were trained with. And it's very difficult, and you have to be patient with yourself, and you have to keep at it. You never quit. You have to keep going. And that's in everyday life.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to fall on stage. The point is just get up and keep dancing. Make sure the audience doesn't know that was supposed to happen. Fool the audience.
Right. Usually the perceptions of the dancer is,
it's easy.
It's easy. They're not an athlete. Oh yeah, they are an athlete. Most ballet dancers put in more work than the average football player.
Yeah.
The football player might practice for like a week and do one game, which the dancer would have to practice that week and have to do like 30 shows. So, by
the time I was a freshman in high school, I would go straight to the ballet studio, bring my homework with me. I lived in the ballet studio. I took the bus to the ballet studio. I wore my dance clothes underneath my street clothes, and I was at the studio probably from 5 o'clock until almost 9:30, 4 to 5 days a week, and then rehearsals on the weekend. And that was a freshman in high school. That was just the standard. Nowadays, it's very hard to get kids to even come for an hour,
right?
And focus on one thing. Parents want to put their kids in everything.
Right.
And it really, to master it, you really have to put all of your energy and focus on one thing.
Well, with the COVID now, it's totally different now.
Yeah.
Because you got the kids now in front of the computer for 3 or 4 hours,
right,
and they are dying for exercise. I see parents walk into our studio and I see the exhaustion on their face, and then I see the sheer joy of the kids going into the studio because they want to move.
Right.
They want some kind of exercise, some kind of engagement. So
I think the biggest misperception that people have about ballet specifically is how much work it is. You know, we gear our families and kids to athletes, you know, football players, sports players, soccer, tennis, any kind of athlete. You know, we gear them, especially our boys, from a young age. There's team things, and everyone has an understanding that how much work it takes. But a dancer actually works 10 times harder than any professional athlete, and they're paid nothing.
yes.
So, you know, you're living on a shoestring, but you're working 4 times as hard. And then you have the artistry, not just the physicality. So you have to be really resilient in the ballet world. You also have to be careful who you bring into your circle of closeness.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of competitiveness, just like in sports.
Sure.
You know, and that's one thing that we try to keep at our studio is to make sure that we don't have a competitive cutthroat
We're more of a team environment that we help each other. If there's like, I have one advanced kid, and then I have a beginning. I expect that advanced kid to help me to help that beginner to get to her level. Right. You know, so, yeah.
Well, so since we kind of worked our way to the topic of the studio, what motivates you to start Dancing in the Streets? I mean, when you look at your careers, I mean, it was international performances across respected productions all the way across the country. Joey, I know you were on national TV. I mean, so what motivates you to come back and say, you know what, we want to stand a studio up in South Tucson, and we want to build our studio around introducing people into this art, this craft that probably most people, when they look at that area of the city, they would say that is not the place where you're going to put a ballet studio. That's not where you're going to find your students.
Oh, boy.
So what's the motivation? What called out to you both to stand that up?
Wow, the motivation.
I can say for Joey right away, several things. Number one, being told no. Yes. The glass ceiling for African-American men in terms of directing. Everyone saw him as a performer and a dancer and a teacher. But trying to get to that director level just wasn't there. So he said, I'm going to create my own thing. And this town hall that we went to, that was, when we first came back to Tucson, there was a town hall, and it was all about arts and culture. And the only representative there was from the symphony. Joey stood up and said, you know, I really think we need to expand beyond downtown discussions about culture and arts. Right. And that was the vision for him. You want to tell the story of the backyard barbecue?
Oh, yeah. Basically, when we moved back to Tucson from back east, I was invited to a barbecue. And so it was, excuse me, a lot of my friends. And I was sitting around, I was looking, and I was like, where are the kids are at? And the kids were inside playing video games, right? So I said, I got this trick, and I say, hey, I saw this one kid. I say, hey, you want to make $5? He's like, yeah. I said, does anybody else want to make $5? He's like, wait a minute. So he goes in, and lo and behold, there were like 30 kids that came out because they heard $5. You know, $5, this guy's going to give me $5. All right. I said, no, I'm not going to give it to you. You have to do this certain step that I'm going to do. Whoever does it gets the $5. So I was doing it in the carport. And then the owner says, can you move these damn kids out in the street? So I was like, okay, that's fine. So we moved out in the middle of the street. And then next thing I know, I taught them the step. And I kind of took a step back, and I saw the kids were engaging. And I took a step back, and I looked at Celeste. I'm like, there's something here. You know, these kids want to dance.
He started with like a plie and a releve ballet steps, and they were all doing it out, and that's kind of where Dancing in the Streets name.
I was going to ask, because you were literally dancing in the streets.
Exactly. So that's where it came from. So,
And then how do you, because and if anybody listening hasn't had the chance to visit your website and see some of the videos up there, they absolutely should. One of the things that struck me most, and I know we talked about this a bit before, you know, we were talking about coming on the show, but, you know, there are so many things in this world that if you listen to the people who are doing it and they say, you know, and listen to them saying whether or not you would be capable of doing it, right? Most people would never do anything. right? Because there's always somebody telling you why you can't do something, why you don't belong in this place, that sort of thing. And I look at, Joey, your experience, right? I mean, I can't imagine, as somebody grown up, kind of in the midtown south side of Tucson, an African-American man, that people were looking at you and saying, you know what, you really should look into ballet if this is what you love, right? I can't imagine that was a discussion that a lot of people were having.
No, it wasn't.
Celeste, the same way that it sounds like, that there were people that might say, this is what a ballerina has to look like. Right. And if you can't do this, this isn't for you, right?
My actual teacher told me that. In fact, the first teacher that I had, she said, you'll never become a classical ballerina. You'll be a character dancer, but you don't have the body for a classical ballerina. And I said, oh yeah, I'm going to make myself have one then. And it drove me harder to work harder in class. But then that's also what fell into anorexia too.
Right. So, I mean, certainly you have to be careful. The thing that strikes me when I look at your production, though, is you see kids from, again, an area of town that people would not say, this is where you're going to find a ballet studio. You see kids that you have found a way to make ballet accessible to kids who have handicaps, right? Who they're on stage in a wheelchair. And you're finding a way to incorporate that into production. And so what is so fascinating to me and what's so inspiring about this is that every convention where you could probably make an argument that a person could say, you know what, that's right, I'm going to give up on this because people who know better than me, who have been doing this longer than me, or maybe haven't been doing it longer than me, but they're in a position where they feel they can tell me what I can or can't do, are telling me this isn't for me.
Right.
And throughout both your lives, but also now with your organization, you have managed to turn every one of those conventions on their head and say, nope, we are going to do it this way, and we're going to make it work, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be engaging, and it's going to be fun. And that has to require such an incredible amount of self-confidence and an incredible amount of dedication to sit there and fight that fight. That's not an easy fight.
Right.
So tell me about that.
Me including the wheelchair was always been I'm an includer. I mean, I love to include everybody if I can, but that came to be that actually, I could tell you this one story. When I was dancing with Ballet Michigan in Flint, there was this girl, and she was a deaf ballerina, and she refused to sign language. Right? She would say, you can talk to me. Oh, you can talk to me. Say what your mouth. And I was
she
like,
read lips.
She read lips, really good. So, and then one day, and I kind of lipped and said, how do you hear the music?
Right.
To do the ballet classes and stuff like that. And she took my hand and put it on the piano while the guy was playing, and she goes like this, and I'm like, oh, but I went, wait a minute, okay, that's fine, but how do you do it on stage?
Right.
And she says the same thing. It's that she feels the vibration in her feet in the theater. And I'm like, I mean, this girl was just amazing. She was an amazing dancer, amazing ballet. I mean, and at that time, I said, wow, I want to work with more disability people like that, because she really, I just put that in the back of my mind. So, and luckily I had the opportunity.
Well, he saw this one girl on Facebook, and he felt like, I'd like to offer her an opportunity to dance in the Nutcracker. Right. So he reached out to her mother, and she brought her to the studio, and she was like, well, she's in a wheelchair. She can't do anything.
Well, no, the first conversation, I reached out to her. I say, yeah, I'm a director of a ballet studio, and I like to give, I like to do an experiment with your daughter with ballet. And her first response was, well, she's in a wheelchair, I'm like, yeah, yes, I do know that. So that's why I want to try. She's like, really? This is new to me. Okay, I'll come down, right? So she brought Madeira down, and I brought her down, and it was kind of weird at first, because Madeira was there, the kids were there, I was there, and I'm looking around like going, okay, what I'm going to do.
Right. Brought her to a rehearsal for Nutcracker.
What I'm going to do. My juices started flowing, and all of a sudden, I don't know, something just, I put on some music. I said, kids, go over there, hang on to her, do this step, bring her out. And man, when I put on that music, Madeire's mother was there, you were there, all the other parents were there, and they did that step. Everybody just started bawling, just started like, ah! Ah! And I'm looking around going, I think I got something here.
That particular student, she was almost nonverbal.
Right.
And so there wasn't a lot of feedback whether she enjoyed it or not.
Right.
But as soon as the music started, this grin came across her face.
This big grin.
And you could just see how much she enjoyed it.
And then she saw the kids moving her.
She was smiling. And that was the other thing. When the able-bodied kids were first with the wheelchair student in rehearsal, they were kind of afraid. And they didn't know what to do.
It was kind of both in. I think she was afraid as well.
And after a while, the kids started getting really comfortable and actually started fighting over who would push the wheelchair. Yeah. And so over the years, we've had several different students that are wheelchair bound that have been included in the performances. And it's been really wonderful for all the students because the kids that are able-bodied dancers get a chance to normalize a wheelchair. And then I've had discussions with the parents where they ask me, well, what should we do about costume for the wheelchair? What do you want me to do? And I'm like, I don't want you to do anything with it because the wheelchair is legs. It's not the dance is the student. I want to put the costume on the student, not the chair. The chair is their legs. That's all it is.
Right. And the mother appreciated that so much when she heard that.
She started crying.
When she heard that, she was like, oh my God. So, yeah, I mean, it's not even the wheelchairs. We got kids off the chart, too. We got kids with ADD. I mean, we got kids with diabetes. We got kids with...
We have a lot of kids that have a difficult time in life and in school and in academics and in structure.
Right.
And since Joey's kind of an ADD kid himself, he understands that process.
Right.
And we sort of guide him to self-discipline. It takes a long time, but we do get him there.
It takes a long time because the way we use usually most ballet, the way that ballet is usually taught is taught by fear.
Traditionally in the past.
It's by fear. And what I do is I do the total opposite, which is that's kind of like you said on the flip head because you don't supposed to teach ballet while you're laughing. That's a no. But I broke that open because the kids that I have, they need humor. They need the humor and the laughter for me to get the help them to learn the step. Or for me to get into their minds for them to...
It breaks down the barrier.
Yeah.
Humor breaks down the barrier. There's no defense of, here, I'm telling you to do this and you do this.
Right.
So they don't have that defiance issue. They're at ease already. And Joey himself knows when he was bored in class in ballet class, he's like, I don't want any kid to be bored. So he makes it fun for them, but they're working at the same time. They don't realize they're working hard.
Right.
They'll come out and they're like, I'm sweating. It's like, you're supposed to. That's a good thing.
That's a good thing, yeah.
It's such a great perspective to have where it's, I think if anything else, I mean, it's okay to be working hard and still have fun.
Oh, yeah. You can have you can have discipline and fun at the same time. I mean...
Joey has mastered that. I'm still working on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so for those of you just joining us, this is Culture at Work in Tucson, proudly presented by Crest Insurance. As the largest locally owned and operated insurance brokerage in southern Arizona and one of the top 100 insurance agencies in the United States, Crest is your hometown insurance broker in Arizona, Colorado, and California to assist with commercial insurance, workers' compensation, and employee health insurance plans. I'm your host, Matt Nelson, and now back to our conversation with Soleste Lupu and Joey Rodgers of Dancing in the Streets, Arizona. So I think about that first conversation, like you said, where you're talking to a kid, and the great thing about kids, right, is that kids have a very hard time if they know that they're being lied to. It's written on their face, right? The kids lack that, kind of learned filter over time to listen to somebody lie to them and say, yeah, no, I think I see where you're going. If the kid, if you're not selling the kid on something, they're going to let you know right out of the gate.
Right.
So I can only imagine the challenge of any of the kids that come into your studio where you're giving them their first taste of something that probably most of them have never been introduced to, that nobody's ever taught them to picture themselves in. And you've got to really meet these kids where they're at. They're in, you've got tough economic situations, tough home situations, tough school situations, different physical abilities, cultural and racial issues, so on and so forth. You've got literally, I mean, this is the, if you were to take most of the problems that I think any group of people would encounter and put them all into one little studio and then ask them to all do something really hard together, that might be it, right? And like the only place that I can think of that would even approximate it is like I remember the first day of basic training where they threw everybody in there and they're like, it's going to be awful for the next 12 weeks. Right. So walk me through that discussion with some of these kids and some of these parents, because, with the parents, there's, I'm sure, skepticism about, really, you think that my kid is going to be doing this? And then with the kids, I'm sure there's skepticism of, really, am I going to be doing this? How do you have that conversation? How do you win these people over?
Well, I got the, man, you hit it on the nail.
It's not the kids usually, it's the parents.
And the ones, the bigger ones it's the Mexican fathers. And I can tell you a quick story. Usually when the Mexican girl comes in to do a class, they bring in the whole family to watch, right? Even the boys. So what happens is
the sisters in class.
I'm engaging, yelling, da 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 da, and the boys in the lobby is like looking in. I call it the curiosity lane. I see it, so I go out to the lobby and say, "Hey, you want to try this?" And the boy goes, "Yeah, sure, I'll give it a try." So he gives it a try, ends up liking it. So I said, "Do you like it?" "Oh, yeah." "Do you want to do it again?" "Sure." "Okay, well, you need to tell your parents. Let your dad know what you did." And then his face frowns frowns. I was like, I see that frown. So this is what you tell your dad. You took a ballet class from a black ballet teacher. Tell him that. "Okay, Mr. Rodgers." So what happens is he did. The next day, the Mexican father comes in with the son and says, "Are you the black guy my son's been talking about?" I'm like going, "Yeah, I'm wow, ballet, huh? I never would have thought." I was like, "Just give me an hour with your son and then you can take him, or usually they don't. They keep bringing them back." So, I mean,
I think there's two things with ballet, how you approach it. One step at a time. A plie is a plie is a plie. We have the same standard for everybody. So that's the first thing with the students. Just attack it one day at a time. We always tell the ugly duckly story to everybody. Joey gives them this little talk. You're going to feel awkward. It's going to be horrible. You're going to look all awkward and feel ugly, and it's going to be
uncoordinated.
Yeah, but you keep coming back. You keep coming back every day. Then eventually you're going to be that beautiful swan. So we usually tell that story. I have to tell that story to the teenagers all the time.
Right.
And that's the thing that this generation doesn't understand working till you get something. They're so ingrained with the great things of technology, being, "Oh, I go to YouTube, I can learn everything I need to know."
Right.
And you can, but you can't. If you don't have an instructor there with you with ballet or performing art to correct you, you're not learning properly. And it also takes a lot longer to master it than you think. You on YouTube, you learn it and you think you're doing wonderful because you have no feedback.
Right.
So that's the other thing, is learning how to take feedback and make it a positive. These kids don't get feedback. They show up and they're automatically awarded. Right. You don't do that.
No.
Ballet world doesn't, you don't show up to the theater and you get an award. You don't get to perform if you don't come to the rehearsals. You don't get to come to a rehearsal if you're not coming to classes. I mean, it's this whole thing with parents and educating them is that same issue of going back to sports. I have to have a conversation with parents. Well, if you are in soccer, how many days a week did the kids go to practice? Oh, every day.
Right.
Okay, so if you had your child and they didn't go to practice every day and you showed up to the game, do you think they'd get any time in? No. Well, then why do you think ballet's any different? Right. If you come to every rehearsal but you don't bring your kids to class, they're not going to get to dance. They won't know what they're doing. Right. They're going to be confused. And the same way goes. You come to all the classes but you miss all the rehearsals, you're not going to know what you're doing on stage. It's the same. All of a sudden, they get it when I do a metaphor with sports.
We're trying to get the metaphor of dance is more than a hobby.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So,
and we're athletes, and
Right.
you have to approach
And you
it
got to approach
like an athlete. Everyone understands if you're doing football, soccer, basketball, even cheerleading, they understand is a sport and an athletics. But with ballet, there's just this huge misperception that we can come casually and my
put
child
my
will
leg on the
magically
bar and
Yeah.
stretch my foot. And,
dress my child up and they look beautiful and take a
right.
picture and a selfie and put the video up, and that makes them a dancer. That's not it.
Right.
So I think the other thing is parents see the change in students.
Yes.
That once we convince them, keep coming, they see the physical change and the academic change in kids. We usually tell them when we have these high, ADD kids, it usually takes probably 2 months before you notice some kind of change, and it can be small. They have a little bit more attention towards what they're doing for a minute or two. Their grades gradually start to improve. They begin engaging with other students more. You can see the change in them, and that's when the parents really are won over for what we do. And the other big test is a Nutcracker production. Once we get through a Nutcracker production, all of a sudden the light bulb goes off for the parents and the kids.
Yeah, and the kids.
They really get it.
Right.
You mentioned music. Well, really, I mean, the arts in general. It kind of amazes me. I've played music for 25 years. Was not classically trained. I was, much like how I think you probably looked at ballet. I was a boy in high school, and I said, well, gosh, it looks like all these guys that know how to play guitar. That seems to be quite popular, right? Like, I'm going to give a go at that.
Good way to get girls.
Right, exactly. I'm going to have a go at that. And so, so it was one of those things where this was pre-YouTube, but this was, when you had tablature, right? I don't need to learn how to play music. I need to learn 4 chords to be able to sing at a party, and I can kind of go from there. This is, and what amazed me, 25 years later, right? What amazed me, of course, is when you start to do something and you start to, if you stick to it, that's the challenge, right? Is getting whatever that level of interest is. And I was lucky in that I had a friend who was classically trained. And so, like a good friend does, recognized that, hey, look, I was not the type of personality that was going to be, forced to sit down and read music. It was one of those things where it's like, all right, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this on you.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
A little
One step at a time.
And you're gonna learn this, and you're gonna say that sounds really cool, and then I'm gonna talk to you about, all right, now if you knew what went into this, you wouldn't have to just mimic me. You could start doing this on your own, right? And then you start getting into music theory, and it's fascinating. I mean,
that's
you
where
get
the
into your
creative
craft.
juices can get flowing.
Exactly, because you finally learn. You learn, all right, so these are the mechanical elements of the things that we're doing, and so now when somebody gives you something complex, you can start to break it down to the component parts, which is such an important skill that the arts have the ability to kind of nest in a way that you don't realize it. That ability to think about things as a sum of component parts.
Problem-solving skills in the workforce.
That's why we're trying to be such advocates, because the arts has been so slashed in the school system, and there's just been this pushback by STEAM and STEM. Excuse me.
Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEM has been just pushed upon the world, and we had access to an orchestra, a band, a theater, a dance program. All of the performing arts were accessible in public school. Nowadays, kids don't have an inkling of it unless someone shows it to them on purpose. And that's very hard. And so we're trying to push back against STEM for STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics. If you look at other European school systems, arts is part of their academic routine.
Curriculum.
And exactly that point that you just articulated so well, once you master it, you figure out how to problem solve, you figure out how to go outside of the box to problem solve, because sometimes the answers aren't right in front of you. You have to sort of go around them to get to solve the problem.
Get you prepared for the workforce.
And that's really what's kind of missing in this workforce, is this push to STEM only.
Only, yeah.
I always use the example of Albert Einstein. He used mathematics as his tool to do what he needed to do or to prove his theories. But he had to use his imagination to figure out how to get the tools there. So I always use that as the importance of arts and creativity in the workforce, in workforce skills, in developing, human beings that are going to be part of our workforce.
Right.
Right. Well, and I think about the thing that is really, I think, refreshing in a lot of ways about the arts and really anything where, how do I put this? They're kind of in a lot of ways they're a bit naked. Right? In that when a mistake happens, it's immediately apparent to everybody seeing it, right? And music is the same way. I mean, it's like there is no working your way around the fact that you hit the wrong note. Everybody in the room knows you hit the wrong note.
Yeah.
You draw a bow incorrectly, everybody knows what that sounds like, right?
Yeah. You miss a step in dance and everybody's going left and one's going right, you'll see it.
There's no hiding, right?
Right,
And which is one of those things that in, kind of the current YouTube world and that sort of thing, I mean, there's a lot of space to hide. And again, I think that we, in a lot of ways, we don't give kids the credit for being as smart as they are, because these kids, they recognize like you can only convince somebody to some level, and because kids have such a nascent ability to be honest, like they know when something's not going well. They know when it's, hey, look, I messed up, and you can tell me that I did great all you want, but I know that I messed up, and you can read it on their face.
Yes,
absolutely.
But that's the key to success that we do,
Right.
is that we tell them from day one, you will have something happen to you. And it's not the mistake. Don't focus on the mistake. Focus on keep going. The audience doesn't know the choreography. If you screwed up a step, they aren't going to know it until you show it on your face.
Show it on your face,
Right.
exactly.
Same thing. Everyone hears the sound, but you can play it off and say, hey, I was supposed to do that. It was a comic part.
Right.
If you don't let other people know that it was supposed to be a mistake, and same thing in life, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, keep moving forward.
Keep
Don't
moving
let that mistake destroy and
Consume
consume
you.
you, because it can.
There's such a grace and humility to that, where the grace is the ability to kind of move forward, right? To forgive yourself, show yourself some grace and move forward.
Yes.
And then the humility to kind of come in recognizing that, you know what, like I might not do this perfectly and I'm going to do it anyways.
Correct. Absolutely, yeah.
So are these all things that you, when you're in the mix, as dancers yourselves, are these all lessons that were apparent to you, or is it something that once you started to move into choreography and directing other people that these things really became apparent? Where does that light bulb go off?
I don't think there's any light bulb. I think it's just that we acquire those skills, and until other people say, hey, what skills did you bring in that you think about? Or when you see other people not having those same skills, they just become like air to you. You're in the arts world and you learn all these things, and they're part of your life and part of your being. And you don't realize that other people don't have them until you're around people that don't have them.
Right. Good point.
And I know, Celeste, you've done a lot of work outside of, outside of dancing and outside of dancing in the streets. How did the experience that you had kind of in this craft shape the way that you've approached everything else? And this is, I think, maybe almost a good tie to if we're trying to set these kids up for life, right? Or set anybody up for life, quite frankly, because like you said, I mean, it's 3 to 103. That's who you welcome into your studio, which is such a great message, right? But so as you're trying to set people up and you're trying to say, all right, you're going to learn these skills, but we're going to help make them portable. Because that's the benefit of this. That's the benefit of learning the arts. It's the benefit of learning self-confidence, doing something hard, is that you can then take those skills and those talents that you've developed in your workshop and carry them forward into other things that you're trying to accomplish, whether it's running a business. I know you ran an animal shelter. You've been involved in political advocacy. Joey, I know you through Greater Tucson Leadership, so I know you've been out in the community.
Right.
What do you think are the most important things that you've carried out into the world, and if people were looking at what you do, what should they look to develop similarly?
Wow. A question I hadn't thought of. I'm almost speechless. I think I have to give, again, a huge amount of credit to my mother, Marian Lupu, who was the founder for Pima Council on Aging. I learned so much from her by just being. She took me to conferences with her. She was a female executive director back in the 60s and 70s when there was
That was unheard of.
My father was a biochemist and actually quit that line of work to work in home, and he was the daddy. So I grew up with a role model of an extremely strong, confident woman and an extremely strong, confident male. He was totally supportive of her career without feeling like he gave up anything. He took care of us. And I think that the thing that she gave me was advocacy, and always to be the devil's advocate, to find what the root of the problem is, and don't be afraid to ask hard questions of other people, and don't be afraid to take a risk. And like you had said earlier, make sure that the things that other people are telling you don't absorb into your being. Like, everyone's always going to tell you, no, you can't do this. You shouldn't do it. Don't take that into your being. Like, when you go to an audition, Joey and I were talking about this. You go to an audition, I don't know how many times I was told, you don't look the part, you're great, you're wonderful, but you're just not the right shape, or you're not the right size. So instead of saying, wow, that's my core being, it's like, okay, well, find another part. Keep going. And if I can't find it, like Joey says, we invent our own. We create our own production. We make our own world.
I want to piggyback off you with your mother. Her mother is so genuine because she kind of molded me the person that I am today. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't know about networking. I used to take her to all these charity events. I used to wheelchair all these charity events. She's like, yeah, Joey, that's Jim Click over there. Yeah, that's what's so-and-so over there. That's so-and-so over there. And
stand by the entrance and the exit.
Yeah. Her thing was, she's like, yeah, Joey, we got to get there and we're going to stand by the entrance. I was like, stand by the entrance? Why you want to do that, Mom? She says, watch. Everybody comes to the entrance. Oh, Marion, how you doing? And I'm sitting there. I'm like going, oh, I get it. Oh, I mean, she taught me like the little tricks of the trade to how to get people. It's basically, I learned it in the Greater Leadership, how to woo people. Okay, and I never knew that I had woo-ness until I went to the Greater Leadership.
He's got lots of woo, 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 woo.
I never knew there was a word for it. You know what I'm saying? So she really shaped me, introduced me to a lot of people because she wanted to make sure that Dancing the Street was going to stay around for a long time. So,
well, she saw the potential in him. I know she tried to cultivate me, but I just don't have woo like Joey does. So Joey has a dynamic personality. He's the personality. He's the face of the business, the personality. Everyone loves to be around him. And I think she saw that in him. I am a lot more reserved. I'm more conservative, and I'm a lot shyer. And I don't have that woo ability, but I'm the wind beneath the wings.
Right,
so I'm doing all the stuff that he doesn't do.
Right. But there was a lot of things I didn't realize the ability that I had because I never thought of myself in that light because when like she said, the glass ceiling, I was only thinking about it artistically. I wanted to save every kid. I want every kid to dance and, blah, 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 and that was my mindset. But once we started with Dancing in the Street, and then actually what it really hit is when Mom passed away. When she passed away, that really...
It's still a struggle.
She
died in 2016. She was our founding board president, and she went with us to the Small Business Association SCORE to help us with our business plan. And she really tuteled us in the business end of it. And she really wasn't able to finish her tutelage before she passed away. So it's been a bigger struggle, and COVID has made it even more of a struggle.
Right. Yeah. So, but has been...
I hear her persistence.
Yes.
Whenever my mom would come into a room and politicians would see her, they're like, oh, run, Marion Lupu's coming. Right. Because they always knew that she was going to ask them for something, and she was relentless. She would never take no. She might not keep asking you right away, but she would go back to you next week, next month, next year, because she knew eventually that no would turn into a yes.
Yeah, she always told me, she's like, oh, that's all right, Joey. He said no. I was like, well, that means no, Mom. No, it doesn't. That means that I'm going to go ask him again next month. I was like, oh, okay. That's how it works. Okay. She said, that's Tucson. Just because that person says no now doesn't mean no later. It could be a yes later. So
she taught us about bartership. You know, barter stripping in Tucson. I don't know if you know the early story of Walter Reed Park. He bartered with people to get the trees, with other organizations, do landscaping. He had no money getting the park started, and it was one of these huge bartership things. So my mom kind of taught me that too, that sometimes people can't give you money, but they might give you contacts or things.
Or a service that they can do.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of a question, again, of meeting people where they're at, right? You know, it's like, how are you interested in this? And if you are, what's the best way that I can get you involved, as opposed to coming in with kind of a preconceived notion as to what they can do.
Correct.
Right?
And maybe you want X and they offer you Y and you never thought about Y, but hey, let's work with Y.
Right. Well, and it's funny that that you talk about not knowing that you had woo, Joey, because anybody that is, I knew you before Greater Tucson Leadership just by your suit. So like, I was just like, this guy's walking around in a Superman suit. I got to get to know this guy. This is incredible.
And that's kind of weird though, but you know,
That was another mom thing, is saying get people to come to you instead of you going to other people.
Going to them. So that's.
But the Superman suit is especially interesting because Joey's an African-American male, and a lot of times we're going into these all-Caucasian events.
Right. And it's hard to really go and approach them, you know, when especially you really don't know them.
Sure.
But every time I put on that suit,
The Superman one.
the Superman one, it says, I don't know, what I get is they'll come up to me and says, this is a wonderful suit, and I got to know this man who's in this suit.
Right.
And it draws them in. It's almost mesmerizing when
You
they
can
say
see that they're not seeing any barrier. They're not looking at his color. They're not seeing anything. They're drawn to him because Superman touches some childhood thing for most people.
Sure.
Right,
And
right,
they're
yeah.
drawn to him for that. So then you can get your pitch. You can woo people in. It's
Right.
very easy.
And then once they get in, they're like, I love your suit. That's when I get them.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. So
Well,
it's all a little bit of strategy that mom taught me, you know what
now
I'm
it's
saying?
just giving it away.
Yeah, I did.
That's a great strategy because, I mean, you've addressed, I think, probably the toughest part of, I mean, human beings are weird, right? I mean, we're strange little animals sometimes.
Right.
And there are, I mean, if you don't know somebody, there's such a barrier to walk up sometimes and even say hello for some people. And so when you got something to talk about, like, that's an awesome suit. You've eliminated that barrier.
Exactly. And especially with the guys, because especially the guys in the charity events, they got the dark suits with the red tie. And then when they see my suit, they'll go like this. Honey, I want a suit like that. Why I can't wear something like that? You know what I'm saying? So,
I think that's the artistic end. We're not afraid to take risks. I mean,
Right.
part of being colorful and part of being your authentic self is being artistic. And I think so many men have a difficulty with
stepping out of that box.
Out of the box.
Yes.
You know.
So, you know. So.
That makes sense. Well, and that's, I mean, it kind of speaks to, like you said, the ballet thing in general, which is, you know, that it's being okay with taking a risk. And that is one of those things that,
Right.
I don't know, and when I was growing up as a kid, and I'm not that old, you know, I was born in the early 80s, but it was one of those things that I remember my brother and I both played football, and my brother started taking dance classes. My little brother, he's a year younger than me. And I remember he took some heat for it. There was no way. I mean, we grew up in a farming community, that sort of thing. Like, dance was not something that guys did, especially not guys in high school.
Yeah.
And, you know, so he comes out and he's got, you know, his big sequin vest on and they're doing this big production. But he had such an amazing confidence about him that what was incredible was once people kind of got over that and they started seeing the confidence, you know, all of a sudden it was like, oh, man, this is really cool. It's neat that you're into this. And he was really good at it. You know, and now, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where he has carried that confidence with him for the rest of his life. It's driven everything he's done. And I have to believe it was there, but it's when you take a risk like that and it pays off. You take a risk like that and you're like, you know what, I really had fun doing that, and that was a cool time. You carry that memory with you.
Yeah.
You learn to put a stage, your performance head, your performance body, and we go into a room, it's like, oh, okay, performance time. And even though, like, I'm super uncomfortable in networking, that is just, like, really difficult for me, that I put on the performance mode and I'm ready to go.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, oh God, I lost my thought. Sorry.
So, I think the question I really want to use to bring us home here is because, it's always the rubber meets the road when you see kids, or you see anybody, but I think especially kids, because when you see kids do well, I think it speaks to everyone. Because it's a common experience. We were all there once, right?
Right.
But so when you see kids that are facing a struggle and they pull out of it, right? And they do more than you thought they could. They do more than they thought they could. And all of a sudden you get that kind of look of astonishment and you see that trajectory. Like you can almost watch a person's trajectory shift, right? So I know you've had a couple of students that have come through your studio that have really kind of taken that and run with it. And so can you share, just to give people some context about why they should go check out Dancing in the Streets and why their kids might be interested in it, of a story of some of the kids that have come through there and what they've done after?
Wow. Dancing in the Streets, and out of the 13 years, has been an adventure. We had so many kids. We touched so many kids, and we have one.
Well, we're talking about
student.
Alvaro was one of our first students,
right, that's what I was gonna
and
talk
he didn't
about.
start until he was 17. He came in as a chaperone with his sister. He started when he was 17 or 18.
Right.
He got serious. He's now dancing professionally. He was the first generation to go to college out of his family. They're, first generation
out of their family, and
he's dancing in State Street.
He got hit with COVID, so now, so he's up there, but he's a professional now. We have another girl who is Louisville. Tegan.
She was autistic.
Autistic on the autistic end, and she's a beautiful ballerina now, and she's employed with the Louisville Ballet in Kentucky. So that's two.
We have students. The sister that we're talking about, she was in Smith College. She got a scholarship to go there. She's a huge advocate right now. We just saw an article online about all the things that she's doing, advocating for immigrant rights and just
advocate for the arts. So we're building, we know a lot of our kids are not going to be dancers. We know that, but we want them to be stellars of the community. We want them to be arts advocates as well. That's why we always say, that's why we start the kid very early, to get them engaged and early and excited about the arts, because that's going to take them through their whole life.
Yeah, we have students that are almost all in college and their families had never gone to college. Almost all of our students go on to higher education.
Right.
So that's a huge thing. I think we're instilling that magic you talked about. When we see that, that's what keeps us going.
Right.
And we know that we've changed the life of a child who's probably not going to go into gang and drug activity because now they're high on the arts.
Right. Right.
That they now have that self-confidence that you mentioned that they're not getting. Even in the school system, they're telling them, you can't go except this level.
Right. Well, Joey, Celeste, thank you so much for joining us today on Culture at Work in Tucson. Truly inspirational to hear your story. For those of us who've joined us, I hope you've enjoyed the show this month. I'm Matt Nelson. I'll be back with another episode coming up on the third Thursday of next month. This episode and all my guest details are right here permanently on this channel, TucsonBusinessRadioX.com, as well as Facebook and CultureAtWorkAZ.com. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having us.
Join Matt for another interesting Culture at Work podcast right here